I'm Kevin Pomeroy. I'm the president of the Crawford, Marlborough, Nakoma Neighborhood Association and also a resident of what we call Area 2, one of our districts here. Thanks to all the neighbors attending in person and those on Zoom. Questions for the candidates can be written on the cards and asked on chat in Zoom. We also invite you to our District 10 candidate forum, same time, same place on March 20th. And if you all would take a moment to silence your phones, we'd appreciate it. There's a few of our board members here. Maybe stand up. I won't do a big introduction, but Mary Odell's in the back, and Allison Plummer's here. She's standing. Laura Scandura's here. Carol Bulow's on the Zoom. Levon Bennett is here, and Sue Reggett is here, and Sue and Levon helped organize this event too. Also, a special thanks to our business sponsors that contribute to our organization each year. Vincent Cha, Asian American Family, Zach Birch, financial advisor, Oak Park Place on Nakoma and Midvale, Aaron Perry, agent at State Farm Insurance, and Susan Stair, broker and owner of Susan Stair Homes. I would like to offer a special thanks to Bill Tischler, our AV guru here, who's in charge of sound and whatnot. We really appreciate it. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Charlie Pittman. She's the News and Public Affairs Director from WRTFM, and she'll introduce our candidates.
Give Charlie a round of applause.
Thank you, Charlie.
Well, hello. Thank you for that introduction, Kevin. And thank you to the Crawford, Marlborough, Nakoma Neighborhood Association for making this mayoral forum happen here tonight at the Westminster Presbyterian Church. That's a lot to say, isn't it? Well, these events don't happen in a vacuum, and they take work from your neighbors to put in and to put on. So let's give the Neighborhood Association a round of applause for making all of this happen tonight. That was a hearty applause. Thank you. So tonight we are officially 3 weeks away from the spring election. And while that might seem soon enough to most of us, the candidates still have so many forums, debates, and events in front of them before April 4th. So let's thank the candidates, Satya Rhodes Conway and Gloria Reyes, for making the time to join us tonight. And the rest of us here have perhaps the most important role to play in our democracy. We have an important decision to make. Who do we want to lead our city? Before we decide, we put in the work, and we research the candidates to ensure an informed decision. So thank you for showing up, tuning in online, registering to vote, and getting to know these two fantastic candidates in front of us. So give yourselves a round of applause, even at home. So tonight we are having a forum, not a debate, but there are still some guidelines just to review. The candidates before us will have 2 minutes per question to respond. Candidates, your timekeeper, Levon? Laura. Your timekeeper, Laura, will let you know when you have 30 seconds left. There we go. And when you're out of time. Throughout tonight's forum, you will be given 3 one-minute rebuttals. You only have 3 to use for the entire night, so use them wisely. And members of the audience, you have the most important role. Again, our goal is to get your questions answered, so don't be shy to ask something that you haven't heard answered yet at a different forum. In front of you, or to the side of you really, at that table, are cards. Please write your questions on it and try to make it legible so that I can read it. And our volunteer, Levon, will collect your card and bring them up to me. And we already have a few to get started, but I want to hear your questions, not so much mine. So with that said, we will start with opening statements. I'm going to have the candidates introduce themselves. We've flipped a coin, And incumbent Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway will go first.
Thank you, Shali, and thank you all for being here, and thanks again to the folks at the Neighborhood Association for organizing, and our tech wizard, the Alder Tischler, for making that happen, and hi to everybody on Zoom. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Satya Rhodes Conway. I'm honored to be the mayor of Madison, and I'm excited to be running for another 4 years. 4 years ago, Madison chose a candidate who wanted to take the housing crisis seriously, who wanted to finally bring rapid transit to Madison, who wanted to infuse racial equity into all of the work that the city does, and wanted to take bold action on climate change. I've done all of those things and more, and that is despite a global pandemic interrupting our work. I'm proud of the work that we've done through the pandemic, and my partnership with County Executive Parisi resulted in one of the highest vaccination rates in the country, and I'm proud to have the county executive's endorsement. I'm also proud of the work that we're doing right now on the issues that face our community in the wake of the pandemic, things like public safety, traffic safety, investing in equitable economic development, and caring for our youth who were particularly impacted by the pandemic. I hope we get to talk about all of these things tonight and more. But in the meantime, particularly for those of you at home who have Google Easy Access, I invite you to check out my website, satyaformadison.com. And most importantly, I ask for your confidence in me for another 4 years and for your vote on or before April 4th. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Gloria Reyes, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. To all those on Zoom, thank you for logging in, and this is a very important election. Gloria Reyes, I am jumping in this race because I am concerned about the future of our city. I'm a longtime Madisonian. I grew up here. I went to Madison East High School, went on to Madison College, and graduated from UW-Madison. We came here in the early 70s. My parents were migrant farm workers, and they traveled across the country. They came here to Madison during the Cesar Chavez movement, fighting for better wages and living conditions for hardworking families across the country and right here in Wisconsin. They fell in love with the city. Education was so important, public schools. They really wanted a better life for themselves and their family. And so I have served my entire career in public service. I started working for the Wisconsin State Public Defender's Office, and then went on to work for the Madison Police Department as a law enforcement officer for 13 years. And then I got the opportunity to serve as deputy mayor for the city for 5 years. And then, against all odds, the City of Madison residents elected me to serve on the Madison School Board. Just 1 year on, my colleagues appointed me to serve as board president during the most tumultuous times in recent history. And so I am running because I care about the residents of this city. And Madison has prepared me to step up in the lead during this very critical time where we are struggling with a housing crisis, public safety. We need a strong economic development plan. And we need a mayor that has experience, not only on policy, but implementation, and that's why I'm running. And I look forward to talk about those issues this evening.
Okay, thank you both for those opening statements. There was a lot there in both of those, so that should be a jumping off point for questions. Reminder, there are cards over there. We have some coming in. I do, though, want to start off with an issue that has very much been in the news. 2 weeks ago, the Common Council approved a zoning change that would, thank you, allow more unrelated people to live together in certain areas of the city. This change allows for 5 unrelated residents to live together in places zoned for single-family homes. That's the latest zoning change intended to accommodate a rapidly growing city. So candidates, what are the pros and cons of this policy? And what is the way forward that you see for zoning in Madison?
Sure, do you want me?
Oh, yeah, I should be keeping track of that.
Okay.
I think it's customary for you to go first.
Okay, all right. Well, I will go first. Pros and cons. I think the the zoning change is well-intended, right? I mean, I think what it is that it allows 5 unrelated people to live in a home. But it doesn't really do much to, on equity, right? I think that we keep talking about equity in this zoning change. You know, we really have to move people, Black and brown people, into home ownership. So if we're going to talk about equity, we really have to hone in and support and reduce the disparities in home ownership in our city and keep our single-family homes. My concern, as soon as this came out, was that we were going to lose single-family homes in our city. And as the former Madison School Board member, I understand how housing impacts our schools. And so my concern was that we were going to lose enrollment in our schools as families moved out, as developers came in, start building density in our neighborhoods. And, you know, it's happened in the early 70s. And, you know, we're around the Isthmus and the campus area where we lost schools. We had to close schools because of the decreased enrollment. And so although it's well-intended, it really doesn't solve the issues of housing in our city. We have to take a comprehensive approach using universally targeted universalism to really identify, we want housing for all Madisonians, right? But we have to do it based on the needs of the residents of the city. And so passing policies and zonings everywhere without a plan really causes friction and division in our community, and it doesn't solve the issue of increased housing in our community.
Okay. Dr. Rhodes-Conway, your response.
So I could talk about my Housing Forward plan. I could talk about the housing crisis that we're in and how middle-class families are being priced out of Madison and young professionals can't afford to find a place to rent on their own. But instead, I want to tell you a story. When I grew up with a single mom. My parents got divorced when I was 5 years old. I grew up in a university town where there's, you know, considerable pressure from students on the housing market. And at first, because we couldn't afford any other living situation, and then later because we made a conscious lifestyle choice, my mom and I always lived with 2 or 3 or 4 housemates in single-family homes or duplexes around our city. That's the kind of family that couldn't legally live in Madison before this zoning change. My family, that couldn't afford it. And that's the kind of family that we wanted to help. Families like mine, or young professionals that can't find an apartment that they can afford in today's rents and want to have a housemate, or 2 or 3 or 4, so that they can afford to live in the neighborhood that they want to live in. And that's the essence of my Housing Forward plan, and what we've been working on for the past 4 years is to create housing choices all across our city for everyone to be able to afford to live here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both so much.
Can I do a rebuttal on that?
Absolutely,
Okay.
go ahead.
I'll take my first
1
one.
minute.
So I think we have to have a more comprehensive approach here, right? I think, you know, we can't just work on one zoning issue and policies without the voices and engagement of our community. And that's the problem with the transparency and the lack of engagement with this leadership in the last 4 years. So the process is important. We cannot just make these decisions in isolation of the 4th floor. We have to really figure out what our neighborhoods are going to look like into the future. And so we can still, I think 2 alders proposed an amendment and about areas in the campus area, right, to eliminate those from the zoning change. That made sense. Right, that made sense because those areas closer to campus, it really opens up to student housing. We have to have a student housing plan, but
And that's
yeah.
time. Okay. We're going to stick with this issue for a couple more minutes. The 2020 census, the most recent census, found that the city of Madison grew by 16% over the previous decade. Madison is predicted, just the city, is predicted to add 70,000 residents in the next 2 decades. We have a question from a member of the audience, but what are your ideas for adding additional housing to the city to accommodate that growth? And we will start with Satya Rhodes Conway.
Thank you. So what we've been working on over the past couple of years is to address that problem, because we know that in the decade from about 2010 to 2020, our housing market did not keep pace with population growth. So we are about 4,000 units of housing behind. And then based on the numbers that you just heard, we know that we need about 1,000 to 2,000 units of housing every year to keep up with population growth. And so we've been doing a number of different things. On housing creation, we've already talked about some of the zoning changes, but we have been making it easier to build housing in our community. And we have been, according to the comprehensive plan, we've been focusing on infill development, because that's what our community asked us to do in the comprehensive plan process. And so we've been looking to encourage missing middle housing and to encourage additional dwelling units like backyard cottages, to encourage housing co-ops, to encourage the land trust, all sorts of different housing all across our community. And so in some places that means big buildings, mostly downtown and on our big transit corridors. And in some places that means, a duplex or a triplex or a backyard cottage. And it's important that we be making it possible for the market to create more housing to keep up with this population growth. The other thing I want to just mention is that during my 4 years, we have more than doubled the Affordable Housing Fund and used a variety of different mechanisms to create affordable housing, because at the same time that we need much more housing just to be produced, we also have to make sure that we're producing housing that's affordable to folks in our community so they have housing choice across our community as well.
Okay, Gloria Reyes.
So the adding additional housing in our city, as I mentioned, I think we're in a housing crisis, but we're also in an affordable housing crisis. And so there are two ways in way leaders lead during crisis, and that is the crisis manages the leader, or the leader can manage the crisis. And what's happening here is that we're just throwing ideas out there like backyard cottages, which will not add a significant amount of housing in our city. And so we have to manage this crisis, and we have to do it intentional. And that's why my plan really includes an equity component where we're talking about targeted universalism, housing for Madisonians, for all Madisonians. But we have to have targeted approaches to making sure that seniors stay in their home, making sure that we're building housing for 55 and over that's affordable. Workforce housing, that we are building homeless shelters, housing first developments. And we do all that with an intentional engagement with our residents. And that's going to include relying on the comp plan. We're going to, as mayor, I'm going to bring together a housing advisory team that will consist of realtors, developers, neighborhood associations, reinvigorate the planning councils, because we can't, again, make these decisions at a city council floor or on the 4th floor of the mayor's office. This has to be an engaged process with our residents. And that is how our city will grow. And it will stop the division in our community that's currently happening right now.
I'll take a rebuttal.
Okay.
I just wanted to take a little more time to add a few other things that we're working on. And without even getting into the issue of homelessness, which I believe my administration has completely transformed the city's approach to homelessness and dramatically reduced unsheltered homelessness in our community. We have also been working on creating opportunities for homeownership. One particular program that I think has been very successful is in partnership with the Urban League, but we also have a pretty robust program for homebuyer education and down payment assistance. And we're working now on making sure that we can understand what the barriers are to creating more affordable ownership opportunities. It's not likely that we're going to be able to create a lot of affordable single-family homes in Madison, given land prices, but we're looking at how do we create affordable condo options, how do we create affordable zero lot line developments, townhomes, things like that, so that people who are interested in moving into homeownership are able to do that because we're producing those kinds of units.
Okay. So we've heard the term affordable several times already tonight. And when we talk about Madison's housing crisis, we tend to use the term affordable housing. My question to the candidates is, what proportion of a person's income do you think is reasonable to ask a renter in Madison, or perhaps someone who just bought their first home? What percentage of their income is reasonable to ask them to pay each month? In other words, how do you define affordable? And we will start with Gloria Reyes, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think rent is just off scale right now. I mean, I think people working class people can't afford the housing that's being built right now, downtown, anywhere. We're being priced out. And what's reasonable, I mean, I would say is the technical thing, isn't it, like 70% of wages for housing? But it's extreme. People are not making the wages, right? We have to have a strong economic development plan to ensure that we are supporting entrepreneurship, startups, and supporting our businesses, reinvigorating State Street, and supporting a public market that's going to bring economy into Madison. So it's not just about building housing, it's about building a strong economic development plan so that people can make more than a living wage and afford to buy a home in Madison or rent a home in Madison. Right now, it is, you talk to new entrepreneurs, young professionals who just can't live in Madison right now. And so we really have to focus on developing a strong economic development plan.
Satya Rhodes Conway, your response.
Thank you. The widely accepted definition of affordability is that an individual or a household pays no more than 30% of their income for housing and no more than 45% for their combined costs of housing and transportation. And so that's the definition that we use at the city. And we try and create affordable housing for people at all different levels of income. So when we talk about affordability, it can be a little confusing, but generally the affordable housing that the city is subsidizing right now is for people who make between 40 and 60% of the area median income. I believe we need to be creating more affordable housing at the 30% of area median income and below, while also creating workforce housing, which is generally defined as folks who make 80 to 120% of the area median income. We really need to be producing housing at all of those levels to have a healthy housing market and a city where everybody can afford to live. I want to add a couple of other things because I think they're important. First of all, we are operating in an environment in Madison where we've been heavily preempted by the state. The state took away all of our ability to protect tenants or to regulate around evictions. We used to have very strong tenant protections in Madison. We no longer have those thanks to the state legislature. We also don't have the ability to raise the minimum wage, which would be the ideal situation in a city like Madison with a market like ours, is to have a local minimum wage floor. But we can't do that. So we are using every tool that's available to us at the city. By the way, they also took away the ability to do inclusionary zoning. So we're using every tool that's available to us to create affordability in our housing market, but we're pretty severely constrained by the state legislature. The last thing I'll say is that the status quo is creating a problem, and that we have to move on from the status quo.
Thank you both. So we could be here talking about zoning and housing all night, but we should move on. Let's move on to public safety. This is from one of you who brought their own note card, so shout out to whoever did that.
Well prepared.
Thank you, Chad, for submitting. Oh,
It's
from
from the
chat.
chat.
Oh.
From Chad on chat. Thank you. So this person asks, in a perfect world, one in which funding is not an issue, what would a world-class, progressive, problem-oriented police department look like? And we will begin with Satya Rhodes Conway.
Well, that's a great question. And honestly, I never get to think about what we would do with unlimited amounts of money, because that's so not the situation. I actually think that I would like to expand the question a little bit, because I think that when we're talking about creating public safety in our community, we have to really think beyond just law enforcement. And so I think in a perfect world with unlimited resources, certainly we would want to invest heavily in training and recruitment and retention for our police department, so that we're making sure we have the very best officers that are well trained and that we keep them for a long time, so they can get to know the community. And ideally, honestly, if resources were unlimited, I'd find a way to do employer-assisted housing, so a higher percentage of our city staff would live in the city than do now. I think that is really important. But I also would be investing in our violence prevention unit in public health. And making sure that they had the resources they need to be responding to incidents of violence and to be treating violence like the public health problem that it is. I'd be investing in our CARES program, and if really resources were unlimited, I would be generous to our neighbor communities and expand CARES to cover the entire metropolitan area. So CARES is our behavioral and mental health crisis response that's dispatched by 911. And I would be investing significantly in our community development division that does a lot of grant making into community-based organizations in our community. Things like workforce development for young people, for adults, out-of-school time programming for young people. All of these things contribute to making a safer community. And I think we ideally would be investing in all of them.
Gloria, raise your response.
I think that, a progressive, problem-oriented policing is the question, right? I mean, I think, all those other things are important and are things that I have dedicated my entire career on. And I'll talk about it if I have time. But progressive, problem-oriented policing is providing the tools to our Madison Police Department that they need to recruit and retain good officers. Right? I mean, we have been in an environment for the last 4 years where the police department don't feel supported by this mayor. They don't feel supported by a community. And so we have to really change the culture to ensure that we bring and we're able to recruit good officers. That's why I became a police officer for the Madison Police Department, because I wanted a community policing role. And we have to give them the training, invest in the tools that they need, like body cameras, right? How many times does this community look for transparency in our police department? But yet, it has been years, we can't even make a decision on body cameras. When I was a deputy mayor, just before I left, we started the North Side, program that we were going to start, but it hasn't happened. And so we really need body cameras. But then all those other things, as deputy mayor overseeing public safety, one of my things was, I started the public health response to violence. I started the community safety intervention team. I gave the recommendation to the mayor here on the CARES program. And so it is a community response, but we also, for problem-oriented policing, we have to give them the tools, and we have to bring our policing up to 21st century policing. The recommendations that Obama gave years ago and sent to all police departments, we're not even there yet. And we used to be the top-notch police department across the country.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Let's stick with public safety. I have a few questions here submitted by you that have to do with juvenile crime and car thefts. I do want to share a couple statistics. According to a recent public safety address from the Madison Police Department Police Chief Sean Barnes, homicides, home break-ins, and robberies dropped in 2022 when compared with the year before. Also, relatedly, home break-ins dropped by 33%. Non-residential burglaries spiked, though, by 43%. So while we are sorting through these numbers, candidates, can you tell us your plan to reduce juvenile crime and reduce recurrent crimes committed by youth? And we will begin with Gloria Reyes.
Yeah, I think, we have experienced significant juvenile crime in our city, and I think a public safety priority of mine is to identify recidivism, because we know who these kids are, right? They're in and out of the juvenile justice system, and we're losing them to the criminal justice system, and we're doing nothing about it. So when we talk about data, the data alone doesn't tell us the story of what's happening with our children in our community. We are failing our children. We need to intervene and provide strategies to deter them away. So my plan will be to implement an Office of Violence Prevention. I will designate a deputy mayor that's solely responsible for that, working with public health, working with the Madison Police Department, working with the CARES program, and working with the community safety intervention team to give me 5 recommendations of what we need to do to intervene in the lives of our young people today, and also include MMSD. And we are a progressive city. We say that all the time. So how can we not invest in our young people and lose them to the criminal justice system? And so the data doesn't tell us much, right? What we have to do is identify trends that are occurring, and we're seeing trends right now. These are the very young people who are going to stay in our community. They're going to raise a family in our community. And so we need to intervene now, or the crime is going to get worse. And so we need to pay attention to what is happening, because if we just say we're trending in the right direction, we're not trending in the right direction. We are not trending in the right direction. The Madison Police Department has worked really hard. That is because of their work and the leadership of Chief Barnes. We have to elevate this into the mayor's office, and we need to take responsibility for the lives of our young people in our city.
Thank you. Satya Rhodes-Conway.
Thank you. So one of the things that we did in, I think 2 budgets ago at Chief Barnes' request is we hired a new position in the police department that is dedicated to analyzing crime patterns and planning a response. And the chief has done a great job of using that position, and he brought on a great guy who's doing, I think, really useful work. And the chief has, every summer and now on an annual basis, has developed strategic plans for how to deploy the resources that we have in this city towards the issues that are most pressing in terms of public safety. And while we haven't identified specifically crimes by young people in that category, it has a heavy overlap with the priorities that the chief has identified, which were shots fired, stolen cars, and traffic crashes. And then coming soon, I don't want to steal his thunder, there's a couple more that relate to the statistics that you mentioned. And this work has been incredibly effective, and the chief has been doing this with my full support. I meet with the chief, the folks from public health and the violence prevention unit, and with community development every other week in a meeting specifically focused on violence prevention. So this has my full attention. And we've been using evidence-based methods to address these issues. And I think from the statistics you have heard, it is making a difference in our community. I want to also mention that we regularly meet with the school safety staff and work very closely with them to identify and work with individual young people and their families to support them, folks that are having issues with the justice system or creating problems, and trying to surround them with the resources that they need in order to be successful. We also have a great group of work. I will stop. We have a great violence prevention coalition that I'd love to tell you more about at some point.
All right. Well, we won't stop talking about public safety and crime. We have a couple questions here asking your support for various items. So over the past several years, we've seen an increased focus on the role of policing in our community and nationwide. We have one question here that asks, what you would have done differently in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. You were both in the public eye in 2020. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the role of policing changes. And there are many policing changes that are still getting off the ground, from a civilian oversight committee to an independent monitor to a non-emergency behavioral response program. So I know that's not quite a question, but I want to incorporate the spirit of this question. So if you could kind of speak to and what you thought in 2020, what you're looking ahead to now, and Satya Rhodes Conway, we will start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and make sense of all of those things together. So the summer of 2020 was an incredibly difficult time for our community. And I think in some ways, our police department was not prepared for protests that were both violent and about them, and initially didn't know how to react to that. We figured it out over time, but it took far too long. And so what would I have done differently? I would have tried to help them take a different approach much quicker than they did. I think that was a real issue for all of us. I also, just broadly, during the pandemic and that whole time period, I think we could have done a much better job communicating with the community. It was a very chaotic time, and it was difficult for us to get information out fast enough to people. The other thing that I would have changed, which unfortunately wasn't in my control, I would have made the city council vote to provide funds to the merchants that were impacted on State Street, and to help them recover from the violence. Unfortunately, the proposal that Alder Verveer and I had to do that was voted down by the City Council, and so we had to find other ways to support those folks. Now, on questions about changes in public safety, I think that you did mention the Community Oversight Board, which is, or Civilian Oversight Board, which is great. And the chief and I have been working through the stack of recommendations. He takes that very seriously, so do I, and I think that we are making progress on that. And then finally, we did institute CARES. Our community had been talking about it for a while, but my administration got it done. And not only did we start the program to send a community behavioral health worker and a community paramedic on 911 calls, but we've expanded it multiple times with more coming.
And that is time. Gloria Reyes, your response?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I was a former law enforcement officer, and we're very much trained on how to respond to these types of incidents. So I doubt that the Madison Police Department didn't know what to do, right? But this is where experience comes in, right, as a mayor. When I worked in the mayor's office as deputy mayor, when the shooting of Tony Robinson occurred, and we had protest. And if we go back and we look at how that was handled, that is how an experienced leader handles a crisis. We had safe protest, no destruction of property. We met with the organizers, and of course it was a different incident, different time, but we handled it. And that is when experience comes through. With George Floyd, I was the school board president, and I just could not believe what was happening downtown. And back when I was, during the George Floyd incident, I convened the United Way and Leaders of Color collaboration, and that was all the police chiefs and communities of color, Urban League, Centro Hispano, NAACP, all came together to figure out how do we deal with and respond to these types of situations. And so I just could not handle it anymore. And so I watched this on TV, the destruction of our city. It was out of control. So I activated the United Way and Leaders of Color collaboration. And you know where I was? I was downtown intervening, supporting our Madison Police Department, and de-escalating situations, working with the Focused Interruption Coalition. I was out there, boots on the ground, activated to protect the city that I love, to protect the residents that I care about. That's what a leader does. We did not see a leader during that time. And this was a critical time for a city, and this is when we need a leader to stand up.
Okay. Okay, we're going to stick with one or two more public safety crime questions. Thank you both for your responses. I see your transit questions. I'm just building the suspense, okay? Okay. Okay, sticking with this topic. Candidates, do you support police wearing body-worn cameras? Why or why not? That's an issue, of course, coming before the city. Again, policies and procedures for a body camera pilot program are still being drafted, and we will start with Gloria Reyes, 2 minutes.
So I think, again, we need to, for 21st century policing and a progressive police department, we have to equip them with the tools that they need. Professionals across the country are recommending body cameras, right? We need transparency. As deputy mayor, I oversaw the committee who reviewed body cameras for our city. The committee felt at that time that body cameras was not a panacea, right? It wasn't going to fix the issues with the Madison Police Department. So we spent $400,000 on a consultant to come in and review the Madison Police Department. We did all that, gave some great recommendations for our police department. And we spent a lot of time, engagement with our residents. And so we can implement a body camera. I do support body cameras, obviously. But with set policies, some of the concerns that came out was, the immigrant community, our victims, right, being caught on camera. But we developed policies to protect our victims, to protect our immigrant communities. So we can do this in a way where we're protecting our residents while ensuring transparency. If we had body cameras on the incident of Tony Robinson, we would not be second guessing what happened in our city during that time. So it's important to build transparency, and it's a tool for us to bring. And it's been, to do this Northside pilot at this point in time, and this was a time where we had federal funding. Federal funding was going to come to our city to help support body cameras. Now there's federal funding not out there right now, so it's going to be an expense. But we have to ensure that we know if something really bad happens in our community, that it is captured on camera and we're able to effectively investigate.
And Satya Rhodes Conway, do you support body-worn cameras?
So as you've already heard, there is a pilot to try body-worn cameras on the north side, and the chief is, as we speak, rewriting the policies for that. And I'm supportive of that pilot going forward. I don't think there's much point in doing a pilot if we don't use it and learn from it and then make a decision about full implementation. So I think we ought to let that process play out. and then see what we've learned from it and what our community thinks, what the police department thinks, and make a decision going forward, obviously in collaboration with the city council. But I think the whole question that we've been asking about body cameras or no body cameras is not the right question. I think the question is, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to ensure that we don't have police misconduct? Are we trying to ensure that we don't have police violence? Are we trying to, is there some other, we want accountability, we want transparency? I don't think we've really had that conversation. At least I don't hear that happening in the community. I hear a very polarized yes, no question on body cameras. I think the conversation is more nuanced than that, and I think that we need to be looking at all of the things that we can do to reach those goals of reducing police violence, increasing accountability, and decreasing misconduct. So that's a conversation that I'm having with the chief, and I have a lot of confidence in his work and the work that he's doing in the department. So I think that needs to continue to be the conversation. Body cameras might be a part of that, but I don't think they're the only answer.
Can I rebuttal on that?
Absolutely, 1 minute.
So it's not, it shouldn't be an either or, right? It should be both. Like we should have, ensure that we have, there's training to prevent misconduct and support to give the police department to avoid what happened in Memphis and in other parts of our city, right? It's a both and. It's not, why does this have to be an either or, right? We need a leader who's going to make a decision. And as mayor, I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to work with the Common Council, and we're going to implement body cameras.
Okay. So it is 7:50, just a time check. Reminder, write down your cards. You won't be weird if you kind of walk over and submit some cards. Give them to Levon. Levon, where are you? You want to wave? Excellent. Because I have a couple, but I would love to see more, and also from the chat. So please bring those up over the next 20, 30, 35 minutes. Okay, so easing from public safety into transit. I was diving into the comments for the West Area Plan, which is being crafted. And there's an interactive map, which you can actually submit to, or at least until a few days ago you could. And one commenter on that map was highlighting speeding outside of Cherokee Heights Middle School. They wrote, quote, "People speed down this hill next to the middle school all the time. Changing the speed limit doesn't mean people will follow it. We need changes to the flow of traffic that force drivers to slow down." And traffic safety is an issue that encompasses public safety. So candidates, what are your proposals to make our streets quite literally safer? We will begin with Satra Rhodes Conway.
This is a great question. Thanks for whoever asked it. You know, when I was just out of college, I lost my grandfather and my 5-year-old brother to a traffic crash. So this issue is personal for me. And several years ago, I announced that Madison was going to become a Vision Zero city. And what that means is that we will reach 0 traffic deaths or serious injuries by 2030. And that's something I'm very committed to. We've already started aggressively working on this. And yes, speed limit reductions are part of what we're doing. They're certainly not the only thing that we're doing, but I do want to point out that the speed limit reductions that we've done have had a pretty significant impact already. It doesn't mean that everybody drives the speed limit. I know you all probably don't drive the speed limit every time you get in your car, but it has reduced the worst speeding fairly significantly, which is important because the chance of a crash killing you decreases with every mile slower that the car is going. So just even bringing down speeds a little bit makes a big difference. But there's lots of other tools that we can use to address traffic safety issues, including enforcement, and the police department has pretty dramatically stepped up enforcement in some of our key corridors, but also education, which we are doing throughout the community, and engineering, which is probably the most important long-term fix. And we have taken an equity lens to our traffic safety work in engineering, and where, for example, we had not done a single traffic calming project in South Madison in years, we now are addressing multiple public safety issues, or traffic safety issues in South Madison.
So, great question. I think traffic safety is so important. I mean, that is, as a Madison police officer, that was one of the #1 complaints that we would see and hear about is traffic. And so I think the Vision Zero is a great concept. I think many cities have started to implement this. Not sure whether we don't have results on whether it's been effective or not. And so that's one thing. I think the mayor sent out some data on saying that we're trending in the right direction. But if you look at the numbers of fatalities, in 2019, there was 7 fatalities. And then after that, 20, 21, 22, they just kept going up. And so you have to think about, well, what happened during those years, right? Well, there was less vehicles on the road, for one thing, because of COVID. People were in their home, they weren't driving as much. So Vision Zero doesn't tell us or doesn't help us in really identifying what was going on during that time, right? Fatalities increased, and that's dangerous. And so we have to really be real about the data if we're gonna come up with real solutions. And we have to invest. I think the Madison Police Department test team is 5 officers for the entire city, right? And so it does take enforcement. Obviously, enforcement is not going to get us out of this mess, but enforcement is critical, right? What do you do when you see a cop? You slow down, or if you know a cop is going to be in the area, you slow down. And we do have to educate. We have to do more education. I think when I found out that the speed limits were being reduced, I was driving down the street and I saw it being reduced. There was no education or engagement with our residents. And so you really have to teach our residents the why it's important.
Thank you both for your response to that question. We're going to move on to transit, the moment you've all been waiting for. Network redesign. This is coming from another individual in our audience tonight. Network redesign has eliminated neighborhood coverage. How will the elderly and/or disabled riders get to a stop in inclement weather? And we will start with Gloria Reyes. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I have I'm sorry. Oh, just a minute. I have a hard time with the network redesign, right? I feel like it is so inequitable and it's so obvious. I found out about this when I was the CEO of Briar Patch Youth Services, when the bus stop in front of our building was going to be removed, and it was going to be 3 or 4 blocks further down. And these are our most vulnerable kids. These are kids who come at all hours of the night looking for help. And we were going to move that bus stop. And so that's why it's so important. And what I did and started was the race equity analysis within the city as deputy mayor. Right? We moved everything through an equity analysis at the beginning before you build. Because if you don't, then you're building something that's inequitable. So you can't say you're trying to build transit equity and leave people out. And so that is what is occurring today. We residents, our seniors, our people with disability, our workers who depend on transit, who live on the far west, far south, far north, are not able to access transit as easily, and they have to walk further. And it's not right. It's not fair. And we have to, as mayor, I'm going to review the equity analysis that was done by the federal government midway through the project. and do it and reevaluate to ensure that the people who need transit, our most vulnerable populations, we get transit for them. That is what I'm going to ensure. Equity is my priority. It has always been my priority throughout my professional career in public service. And so we cannot do this transit network redesign and with these unintended consequences for our community.
Satya Rhodes Conway, your response.
The current transit system was designed decades ago, and the status quo is inequitable. We know this clearly, and we know that right now in our transit system, people of color are much more likely to have to transfer to get where they're going, which increases the chances that they're going to miss their bus, which can have serious implications for their employment or getting to the places that they need to get to. So again, sticking with the status quo, not okay, right? We need to be moving towards a more equitable situation. And that was the entire point of the transit network redesign. So to actually answer your question, one of the things that's inherent in this is an increased access to paratransit. So if people can't access the bus system, they are able to access the paratransit system. But I want to say a little bit more about the redesign, because when you develop a transit system and you don't have unlimited resources, which is generally the situation, you have to make a choice. And you can either go everywhere, but not go there very frequently, or get anywhere very quickly. Or you can go places quickly and have the bus come frequently, but you can't get everywhere. And so when we started the network redesign process, we went out to the community and we asked, where do you want to be between those two extremes? And the community said, we want to be closer to the side of being able to do more frequent and get places quicker. And so that's the system that we designed in response to what the community wanted. That's an inherent trade-off. There's no right answer, but that's what that's what the community wanted us to do.
That's time.
Can I do a rebuttal on that?
Absolutely, and that is your last one.
Okay. So the question that was posed to us, why do you want to get somewhere faster, right, and get service faster? But if you were told that you would have to walk 3 or 4 blocks further or miles farther apart, I think you would second guess, right? And so nobody told us that. And so that's important. I mean, it feels like we've been fooled on trying to understand this network redesign. Like, we have to know the truth when you're engaging our community. When you tell the whole truth about what are the consequences here. And so, yes, I said yes. I'm like, I want to get on the bus every 10 minutes and get to my destination faster. But that's not what's happening. We're having some consequences here, and it's impacting our most vulnerable populations.
I'll take a rebuttal as well.
Okay, 1 minute.
Thank you. So the end of my thought is that what we see in the redesign that will be implemented this summer is we actually have increased access for everyone to job centers around the community. Used to be that our job center was basically downtown in the university. That's no longer true. There are now employment centers all across our community, and the network redesign is literally designed to increase everyone's access to the places that they need to go. But it particularly increases access for low-income households, about 90-something%, and households of color over 100%. Final thing I want to say about this is that when we released the first map of the redesign, we invited public comment, and we heard from the community, and the final map is designed in response to the feedback we got from the community. And not only that, every year, Metro has an opportunity to tweak the routes. So we'll be doing that year after year.
Thank you both for your responses to rapid transit. More questions. I love it. This is so much better than like a social media comment, by the way. We should do this all the time. Okay.
Agree.
So I want to ask, as I review these candidates, we have thought a lot about transit. I wanted to ask you, what all possible transit options, biking, walking, Amtrak could be on the way. What does transit look like in 10 years under your administration? And we will start with Satya Rhodes Conway.
It's another one of those blue sky questions. I love it. The core principle, I believe, in building a good transportation system is creating choices so that folks are able to get around our community in whatever mode they want to choose on that day, in that moment, that makes sense for them. So that means that we have a good sidewalk network that is safe for people to walk around our community if that's what they want to do. And by the way, we're a gold walking city right now, but we could get to platinum. It means that if folks want to bike or e-bike, that there's a great network of bike access, including facilities that are accessible to all ages and abilities. And we're a platinum biking city, but we could do better. It means that people who want to take transit can take transit and can get where they're going efficiently and quickly, and that we've reduced anxiety about when is the next bus coming, because the buses come frequently. And it means that people who want to drive are able to get to their destinations safely. And it's that balance of creating transportation choices through a network of policies and programs that's important for our community. I don't want to dictate what mode of transportation people use. I want to make sure that people have choices, and that no matter what choice you make about how you get around our community, you can do that safely and efficiently in, by the way, all sorts of weather. And kudos to those folks who are biking today.
Clara, raise your response.
The problem is that we, because of the bus rapid transit system, we are eliminated a lot of safety measures that we invested in a few years ago, in our sidewalks and our curbs, right? We're taking that away for the bus rapid transit system. And so I agree, we need all kinds of transit opportunities in our city, and safe, right? But we can't eliminate some of those safety measures that we have taken to replace it with the bus rapid transit system. My concern about the bus rapid transit system is that it's moving us into a budget deficit. We're going to be in a budget deficit, a $32 million deficit in several years, 25, 26, 27, we're going to be experiencing. So when you talk about the modes of transportation in the next 10 years, we have to think about it now, and we have to think about what we're going to do about this budget deficit. Because the bus rapid transit system, which everybody has wanted in the city, every mayor has wanted to do this, right? But we have to be fiscally responsive. The quality of a good progressive mayor is to be able to be financially responsible to provide the basic services to our community residents. And looking where we are now financially, we're going to be in big trouble. And so what I would like to see is a transit system that's equitable and provide safety on all different modes of transportation in our city. And so that's what I would.
Thank you both. So we have a couple questions up here that follow up on structural city debt. I want to point out that Madison's debt payments of over $61 million for 2023, that's 17% of the operating budget, the second highest percentage since 2000. If you happen to catch it, I believe it's streaming online. An excellent forum held by the Wisconsin Policy Forum delved into that issue, and so if you have more questions about that, these two really got into it at that one, so you can watch that. But I want to ask the candidates, while you're addressing questions about the structural deficit, can you also address the future of shared revenue and how the city will continue to get money, as well as a question about will you raise taxes and how will you keep seniors in their homes as well? Again, that's a big question. Double-barreled, as one of my hosts like to call
Triple,
it.
at least.
Tripled, yes. So, but I want you to talk about the operating debt that the city has, but also what you might do in response and how that would affect seniors. Gloria Reyes, you have 2 minutes.
Definitely. I mean, we'll just go off of what I was talking about, right? I think the structural deficit, as I said, a progressive mayor ensures that we're fiscally responsible to ensure that we can provide the basic services to our residents, right? Provide, services for streets, trash pickup, all those things that we depend on, community services, so we can invest in our young people and our homeless population. Where we are now today and where we're going to be moving forward to is going to be, we're going to have to make some tough choices. Unfortunately, we can't depend on future shared revenue. Like, yes, it would be great if we get additional revenue, but since the recession, we haven't. It's been stagnant, right? We're not going to get an increase in shared revenue. And so as a mayor, you have to really think about what we have in place and how are you going to increase revenue. Revenue has been stagnant. And so we have to really build a strong economic development plan that's going to bring revenue into our city. And my plan is to bring together and work with the chambers on developing that economic development strategy. And I'm going to meet with the finance department to provide recommendations of what we're going to do, what decisions we have to make today to prevent the Titanic from hitting the iceberg, right? And that's what's happening here, right? And we have property taxes have gone up. We have implemented fees, and we are impacting our seniors and those who cannot continue to live in their homes. And so we have to be responsible and make some tough decisions, and we need a mayor that's going to do that.
Satya Rhodes Conway.
So much to rebut there. I don't think I'm going to even try. Let me clarify a couple of things because I think your question confused them. So the issue of debt and borrowing is a separate issue from structural deficit. So those are two separate things. The city does borrow for long-term projects, for capital work, for the infrastructure, out in our community streets, things like that. And we do have to keep an eye on that level of borrowing because we don't want our debt service to get so high. Literally just had a meeting with the finance department this week about that, setting some goals for the next budget and how we're going to make sure that we control our levels of borrowing. The structural deficit is a separate question, which goes back to the days of Scott Walker when the state imposed very strict levy limits on communities all across Wisconsin. And literally every city in Wisconsin is facing the same problem. And most of them have had it worse than Madison for longer than Madison because we have a pretty robust economy and a lot of net new construction. And so we've been in pretty good shape, and for the past 10 years, under multiple mayors, have papered over the issues between our cost to continue and what we can put on the levy by a series of fees and charges. And this has happened under every mayor, including me. And what we know going forward is that we have fewer and fewer options to raise revenue. There's only so much we can put on the property tax because of the levy limits, and there's only so many fees that we can turn to. So yes, we're going to have to get creative. Yes, we are going to have to look at service efficiencies and possibly service reductions to save money. And I am much more optimistic than my opponent on the question of shared revenue. I think we'll make progress there. And that's my time.
Thank you, candidates. Well, we are nearing the end of our forum. Yep, checking my phone. However, those who remember 4 or 5 years ago will remember the last mayoral election. And one topic that dominated the discussion because of ongoing events then was flooding. Now, we haven't had a similar flood since, and so maybe it's died down in our consciousness. But now that we've had more than 4 years to analyze it, I wanted to loop back around with the candidates. So candidates, I'm wondering if you can talk about your approach to stormwater management. We will begin with Satya Rhodes Conway.
Thank you. We haven't gotten a lot of questions about this one, so it's great to be able to talk about the good work that we're doing at the city. So in the wake of the big flood, we've done a number of different things, most of them coming out of the engineering division. And so the engineering division and the stormwater utility is literally mapping every watershed in the city of Madison. And they've had an incredible public participation process where they've gone out to neighborhoods and talked to folks about what they experienced, where they experience flooding now, even in smaller rainstorms, and mapped all of that and made a series of recommendations for each of the watersheds. We're only about halfway through the city, but each of the watersheds, they've made a series of recommendations of how we would reduce flooding in those areas. And we're incorporating those recommendations into projects as they come through our capital process so that we are doing the things that we need to do to reduce our vulnerability to flooding in the future. We also changed our rules around buildings and how lots get developed to make, and it's a whole variety of things, but there's a couple of things that are important. One is that buildings have to be built literally higher up off the ground so they're less vulnerable to flooding. And each site is actually responsible for keeping more water on site and infiltrating it into the ground in place rather than letting it run off to impact neighbors. The last thing I'll say is that we've been working hard to study different types of green infrastructure, including rain gardens, uses of trees and silvacells, and other green infrastructure structures to help infiltrate water where it falls, and incorporating those into our projects going forward as well. And I'm really excited about the possibilities there. I think that there's a lot of good work that we can do both with our sort of regular gray infrastructure and with green infrastructure.
Gloria Reyes.
Yeah, we have a great engineering team. I've worked with them over the years. One of my priorities is our tree canopies, right? We've been taking down trees for the past several years and no plan to replant them and in different areas of the city. And so we have to really focus on our tree canopies and also supporting rain gardens in our community. And so great things are happening in engineering to combat the flooding. I was in the mayor's office when that happened. It was a wake-up call for many of us, and I do remember it was part of the debate 4 years ago. And I'm glad that we were already working with the engineering department to really implement strategies to avoid flooding in our city.
I'll take a rebuttal on that one.
Your last one.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention was that part of the reason that storm and subsequent storms are so serious is climate change. And we know that we're going to continue to see increased rain events because of climate change. And so we have to do everything we can to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint. My administration has done that aggressively. We're putting solar on every roof. We're at about 74% renewable energy for city operations right now, and we have a plan to get to 100. We're aggressively electrifying our fleet. We have the first electric fire truck in North America. The new bus rapid transit system is going to be all electric buses. And we are continuing to work in our community to help the community reduce your greenhouse gas footprint as well, including through our Madison program, which, if you haven't checked it out, is a great way to get solar on your roof. It also supports solar on affordable housing and businesses. And we recently passed a building energy savings policy, which asks large commercial buildings, and that's my time,
Large commercial buildings.
to
Okay.
reduce their greenhouse gas footprint.
Well, we're keeping these answers or close adherence to time so that you have an opportunity to chat with the candidates a little bit tonight before they need to leave. So I appreciate both the candidates for putting up with me, as I like to say. Like anything, at the end of the day, being mayor is a job. And I wanted to ask the candidates as we wrap up here, one of you will be elected come April 4th. And some people will probably vote for you. Some people will probably not vote for you. But after April 4th, you're the mayor for the whole city. So I wanted to ask what your strategy for building consensus is as the city grapples with these difficult issues and how you plan to be a mayor for the whole city. I believe, I was doing so well, I believe we start
It's me.
with Gloria?
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Gloria Reyes.
I will be a leader, as I've always served in public service, in engaging residents, in making significant decisions that impact them directly. And so, grassroots leader on the ground who is engaging with residents a lot, all the time. I see this as service. I see this as I'm your mayor, and you guide me in the decisions that you want for the future of this city. That's what I've done my entire career in public service, as a law enforcement officer, as deputy mayor, as Madison School Board president. I don't make decisions in isolation. And so I will reinvigorate our planning councils. I will bring together our neighborhood associations on a regular basis. I will come to you and meet with you and talk about the issues that are front and center that are happening in our community. And I want to take your advice and your guidance and your thoughts back to City Hall so that I can bring your voices to the city council meetings and make a stand on the issues and be a leader on that bench and be a voice rather than facilitating a meeting. I will be engaged with the city council meetings and bring your voice to the council floor.
Thank you. Dr. Rhodes-Conway.
So over the past 4 years, what I've done and what I will continue to do in a second term is to really have an open door policy in my office and invite folks to engage with me, with my deputy mayors, with staff. We get, honestly, all sorts of feedback every day. One of the things that I instituted, which I don't know how previous mayors dealt with it, but when I came into office, the office didn't have a system of how to respond to all of the contacts that we got. And so I instituted a system. So you email us, you give us a call, you're going to get a response. You're going to get a substantive response. Because I think that's really important. My office is here to serve the community. And we've worked hard on community engagement across the city. And I think it's really important that this work be embedded in every department and not just come from the mayor's office. And so, for example, one of the things that I put into my budget and have supported is the Department of Civil Rights hiring community connectors whose primary languages are Spanish, Hmong, and Mandarin, so they can work with those language communities and make sure that folks whose primary language is not English have access to city government. I think I'm really excited about those positions and hope we can grow that program. But I encourage every agency to really be expert in community engagement and to use really innovative ways of engaging with our community, because one of the downfalls in city government is only listening to the same people that show up at city council meetings or, come to neighborhood association meetings. Right? I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right? And so we need to be pushing beyond that. We need to be getting to not the usual suspects, but the people who don't usually engage with city government. And that's what we've been trying to do over the past 4 years.
That's time. I have so many more questions for the candidates, but we should start wrapping it up. So I'm going to offer the candidates an opportunity to deliver a concluding segment or their conclusion. However, I want you to also take the opportunity to brag about some of your endorsements. So we will begin with Satya Rhodes Conway.
Yeah, thank you. Let me start by saying thank you, Shali. Appreciate you. Nice job. Thanks to the tech team, the folks online, and to all of you for spending some of your evening with us. You obviously don't have to, and so I really appreciate that you care about this race. And I hope that you will vote on April 4th. Certainly, I hope that you'll vote for me. I also hope that you'll vote for the progressive, for State Supreme Court Judge Janet Protasevich. That's, I believe, the most important election that's on the ballot. There's also critical city council races and other things, so please vote. I'm really proud to be endorsed by Congressman Mark Pocan, by County Executive Joe Parisi. I think we're up to 13 or 14 members of the city council, including council leadership, Dane County Board Chair Pat Miles, and I think 11 members of the county board, a number of folks from the state delegation, South Central Federation of Labor, Madison Teachers Incorporated, AFSCME, IBW, Victory Fund, LPAC, 314 Action. Anyway, I could go down the list, but you should just go check out my website, satyaformadison.com, and you can see the whole list there. I am really excited about what we can accomplish in the next 4 years together, and I do ask for your vote on or before April 4th. Please early vote if that's your jam. I'm really proud of the work that we've done to protect democracy in our community and make sure that there's early voting options for everybody, even though we can't use our beautiful drop boxes. But that's a fight that I want to keep on fighting. I want to keep on fighting for democracy. I want to keep on fighting for a woman's right to choose. I want to keep working on public safety, traffic safety, equitable economic development, housing, climate, investing in our young people, and I ask that you give me another 4 years to do so. Thank you.
And Gloria Reyes, your concluding
Yes,
statement.
thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, everyone, for Zoom. I am running for mayor, as I mentioned, because I care about the residents of the city, and I'm concerned about its future. We deserve a mayor that is transparent, a mayor that engages with our community, a mayor that will stand up for our residents during crisis. And that's not what we've experienced the last 4 years. We deserve a mayor that is experienced. I think a former mayor even said that I have the skills and the most experienced mayor that has ever run for mayor. And I'm asking you to come out and vote for me. My website is raisformayor.com. My endorsements, I remember as I think about my school board race, I did not receive a lot of endorsements, and the incumbent did. But I was able to come out victorious, and the city of Madison voters elected me, again, against all odds, the first Latina to serve on the Madison School Board. And so I'm asking you for your vote. I am endorsed by the Wisconsin State Journal, Dane Dems. I am endorsed by former Mayor Soglin, former Madison police chief, and Sheriff Barrett, and a whole host of other members of our community and city council members. So thank you again for coming out and talking about the very important issues that impact you directly. Thank you.
And thank you so much to the candidates. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you to Gloria Reyes and Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway. I also want to extend a fantastic thank you to the Crawford, Marlborough, Nakoma neighborhood, especially Kevin Pomeroy and Sue Reget in particular. Also, thank you to Laura for keeping time and Lavon for collecting questions. You both did an excellent job. We want to thank Alder Tischler, who is, how many jobs do you have? Who is running sound tonight, so thank you. Excellent job. And we want to thank you for joining us this evening, to people watching online on Zoom or in the future, and providing your questions. This is an incredible amount, so thank you for being engaged, and I think I asked at least most of them, so thank you. Don't forget to join us back here next Monday, March 20th at 7 p.m. for an District 10 Alder Candidate Forum. We have the special pleasure of meeting two incumbent alders, Sherry Carter and Alder Figueroa Cole. Don't forget to vote on April 4th. I don't think you will. Okay, thank you. Have a good night.